So I'm always going to look at it because there's new ways of thinking, there's new technologies, there's new information that comes, and we want to be able to adjust and iterate on that.
My name is Matt Reiner, managing partner at Capital Investment Advisor, CEO of Wellness Strategies, an author, podcast host, and also a speaker to the wealth management community. My mission is to help every family in this country have access and be served by a human financial advisor. That we all have to live in the moment and not try to force progress too quickly. Let it happen and commit to a long-term strategy in your life, in your business, and in your investment portfolio.
And now, your host and my dad, Matt Reiner.
Welcome to the FutureProof Advisor podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reiner, and today we're exploring what is necessary to ensure that we elevate the client experience, engage our teams, and advance our bottom lines over the coming years. It's about being proactive and not reactive to the changes. And as we talk about within the FutureProof Advisor podcast and the Future Advisor as a whole, is that we must first focus on elevating our minds, getting the ability to be curious, to accept failure, to innovate, to think differently, to overcome who we are, to become who we need to be. Then it's about creating leverage, putting in processes, automation, creating the ability to have time to think, to do, and to explore. And then finally, it's all around innovation. It's a matter of researching. It's a matter of inspiring. It's a matter of doing. But you can't jump right to innovation without having the mindset, because you'll fail in innovation. And you need to have the mindset to accept that. And you won't have the time if you don't have leverage. And so that's what we talk about on the FutureProof Advisor podcast. And today, I want to talk about something really powerful. I want to talk about the strange comfort that we find in doing things exactly the way we've always done them. Think about it. When was the last time you questioned a core process in your business? Not just tweaked it slightly, but fundamentally asked, why do we do this way at all? You know, the truth is most of us don't do that. And it's not because we lack intelligence or creativity. It's because our brains are literally wired to resist change. We are biologically designed to seek the path of least resistance, to conserve, to hold on to mental energy by defaulting to the familiar. That is the human way. And it's not a bad way, it's just the way of who we are. This preference for the status quo is so embedded in how we operate that we don't even notice it. We tell ourselves we're being prudent. We tell ourselves we're being careful or thoughtful, when often we're just being comfortable. But here's the brutal reality. And it's something that I've come to understand over many years, is that the comfort that we feel today is quietly becoming our greatest threat tomorrow. What makes us successful now will not make us successful later. And that is the disconnect. It's the disconnect between what feels safe and what creates growth. And it's that disconnect is exactly what we're going to dive into today. You know, through our conversation today, I am going to share 4 key insights that I've discovered both through research and my own sometimes painful lessons in business. First, we're going to explore the biology behind our resistance to change. This is the science and understanding why is challenging the status quo literally creates mental discomfort, and how our brains actively work against innovation. And we need to know this so that we can overcome it. It's awareness. Second, we're going to look at the psychological traps that make us overvalue what we already have and fear what we might lose. Even when change would benefit us enormously, we tend to choose the route of least resistance, which is what we already know. Third, I'll share a practical framework for separating innovation from day-to-day operations and creating a safe space for experimentation without disrupting our core business. And then finally, we'll discuss why client inputs alone, or why the client's feedback alone isn't enough for true innovation, and how the greatest advancements come from anticipating needs clients don't yet recognize they have, and how innovation is not about a eureka moment. It's about building upon past moments that weren't successful, because over time, things change and adjust. So what I hope is that by the end of today's podcast, everybody will understand not just why challenging the status quo matters, but exactly how to build it into your firm's DNA, turning the discomfort of change into your competitive advantage. And that's the ultimate goal. Here's really what makes this conversation different from typical discussions about innovation and wealth management. Most advice around innovation focuses on external threats, new competitors, changing regulations, emerging technologies. Those are real challenges, but they're not the primary problem. The real obstacle isn't out there, it's in here. It's in our minds. We often think we need more information to innovate, more market data, more client surveys, more competitive analysis. But the reality is that we're drowning in information. It's not more data we need, it's the ability to question our existing mental frameworks. Think about how much gets thrown at us every minute of every day. To handle this constant barrage, our brains create shortcuts, mental frameworks that let us process information efficiently. These shortcuts are vital for functioning in a complex world, but they come with a hidden cost. They lock us into patterns of thinking that eventually become invisible to us. That the way that we just do it, but we don't know why we do it or how we do it, but we just do it because we know that that's the way it's supposed to be done. And we don't just execute processes, we internalize all of these processes. They become how we see the world. I always talk about that. They become our lens. And once it's internalized, these frameworks actively resist being questioned or changed. That's why true innovation isn't about doing more or working harder within your existing model. It's about stepping outside of that model completely. It's about creating space to question assumptions so fundamental that you don't even realize they're assumptions. The uncomfortable truth is this: the way you're doing things now, the methods that brought you success, will not be the way things are done in the future. Your routines may feel like pillars of strength, but they're actually becoming walls that block your view of what's coming. And this is a journey, and this is a process that is just as challenging for me as it is and will be for you. It's a journey we are holding hands along the path of this journey together. Because I talk about this not just to inform, but because the power of me talking about it, of making it out into the world and known, is what holds me accountable to do it. And it's hard, but I need more accountability, just as we all do, because I know that this is the future. There's many stories of this that I've learned from my own experiences, but one really drives this point home. A few years ago, our firm was in a really exciting growth phase, and it still is. We are very, very fortunate. New clients are coming aboard every single week. Our team was expanding at a rapid rate. Adding tens of people, not single digits of people. Our impact was increasing. That was our vision. And from the outside, everything looked ideal. And in all honesty, it really was. But underneath this positive momentum, I started noticing something that was concerning. Then in all good things, there are always challenges that need to be overcome. And the same was true here. What I noticed was that small changes that should have been quick decisions were taking months to implement. Ideas that used to flow freely were getting stuck in endless approval cycles. innovation was slowing to a crawl. I mean, I remember one specific project. It was a simple client experience enhancement that would have taken days to implement when we were smaller, when we were just 12 or 15 people or 8 people, whatever it may be. But now it was dragging into its third month of discussion. And I was sitting in yet another meeting about this seemingly straightforward change. The room was filled with smart, capable people that we all hired. They were all passionate about our mission. They were all the right people and the right culture fits. Yet somehow we couldn't move forward on this obvious improvement. And maybe it was obvious to me, but it was a matter of how we were not making it obvious to everybody else. And I looked around the conference room and I had this moment of clarity that still, to this day gives me chills. The very growth we'd worked so hard to achieve was now actively working against our ability to adapt. Our success was becoming our prison. It wasn't that anyone opposed the change. Everyone agreed it was a good idea, but our organization had developed antibodies against change itself. We built invisible systems that prioritized consistency over improvement, safety over possibility. This idea of don't break what's working, right? If it ain't broken, why fix it? And it was that day that I realized we were falling into what some may know, some may know, Clayton Christensen, he calls the innovator's dilemma. It's the same quote from Mark Zuckerberg that I talk about all the time, that he's always worried about the innovator's dilemma. That's what keeps him up at night. And what I was feeling is that if we didn't address this proactively, we'd eventually find ourselves not necessarily irrelevant, but behind the curve. And that's not where we wanted to be. That's not where we wanted to play from. And what makes this realization so unsettling is that it doesn't feel like a problem when you're in it. It feels like maturity. Like this is what we have to do. That we have our act together. Now we have to be more prudent. So we shouldn't take these types of risks. Like we are finally running a real business, quote unquote. The resistance to change disguises itself as wisdom. And it was that night that I really couldn't sleep. And I tell all new team members that come on our team that the one thing that keeps me up at night, which is different than my other partners as well, is running into this innovator's dilemma. I keep thinking about companies like Blockbuster and Kodak, organizations that didn't lack information about emerging threats. They knew disruption was coming. What they lacked was the institutional ability to act on that information, to question their core business assumptions while they were still successful. When you're in the midst of success, it's very hard to see your eventual downfall or potential downfall because things are going well and we think linearly. We think that what is happening today will continue to happen tomorrow. And so I realized at that moment that we needed to take deliberate action to fight this organizational calcification. We needed to create space for ideas to breathe, for experiments to fail, for innovations to develop, but it had to be separate from the pressures of daily operations. And that's when we created our transformation division. It was a dedicated space, and it is a dedicated space for challenging assumptions and exploring new possibilities without disrupting our core services. You must then create a laboratory within your business where you can build tomorrow's solutions while still acting on delivering today's exact value that you have. And these lessons, and this lens, is the lens that FutureProof advisors look through on a daily basis. They know that tomorrow could be a drastically different day than the past day or past years or whatever it may be. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. So let's start with the first idea. Why is it so challenging to challenge the status quo? Why is that so difficult? And the answer really starts with dopamine, which if you don't know dopamine, we've all talked about. There's a book out there called The Dopamine Nation, I believe it's called. It's the neurotransmitter at the center of our brain's reward system. It is the sugar high in our brain. Dopamine works in a really fascinating and sometimes contradictory way. On one hand, it drives us toward novelty and exploration, because when we learn something new or accomplish something difficult, we get this satisfying dopamine hit, a neurochemical reward that feels good. It is that sugar high. Bam, we love it and we feel good about it, right? But here's the paradox. Dopamine also rewards efficiency and familiarity. If you're shaking your head, that's me too. Science is crazy. Our brains are difficult to understand, because what also happens is when we complete a routine task in a familiar way, we get that same pleasurable response, that same dopamine hit. Our brains are literally designed to reinforce behaviors that worked in the past, like making your bed or, hanging a picture on the wall. That gives us a dopamine hit, right? Efficiency, familiarity. It's a biological double bind, really. The same system that rewards learning also discourages us from changing established patterns. This creates a natural bias toward the path of least resistance, right? If we're going to get the dopamine hit doing two different things, we're going to choose the thing that's easier, which is doing the things that we've already know how to do. So when we're faced with this choice between exploring a new approach that might fail or sticking with a proven method, our brains subtly, without us knowing, nudge us toward the familiar. Not because it's better, just because it's known. And we still get the dopamine hit. So what is the incentive to go try something new? To put ourselves out there for failure, which is then leading to a whole other psychological issues of acceptance, etc. We can think about this in our wealth management practices as well. When you first establish your client meeting process or investment approach or service model, there was probably some discomfort. It was new. It lacked, consistency. You're still figuring it out. You had to think consciously about each step. It required mental effort. But over time, those processes became automatic. They moved from your conscious mind to your subconscious mind. This is what psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls cognitive ease, the pleasant state where everything feels smooth and requires little mental effort. We naturally prefer this state over cognitive strain, right? We don't want cognitive strain because that's where we have to think carefully and deliberately. We want cognitive ease where we don't have to think. We only have an amount of cognitive capacity every day. So Kahneman's research shows that when we experience cognitive ease, we're more likely to believe information is true, where we see situations as familiar and feel good about our decisions. Whereas cognitive strain triggers alerts in our brain, subtle warning signals that something may be wrong, even if it is right, which is so crazy to me. Our brain is telling us that it might be wrong because it's different. Different equates to possibly wrong, which then leads to us not wanting to do it. And this explains why. At a neurobiological level, questioning established processes feels uncomfortable. It's not just organizational resistance. It's not that people are against your idea. It's your own brain, our own brains pushing back against the mental effort required to reimagine what's become automatic. I think of dopamine as being like the process of forging a sword, right? Each aspect serves a purpose. The drive toward novelty and the preference for familiarity. But the true power comes when we can balance those opposing forces, when we can harness both the pioneering spirit that drives exploration and the disciplined execution that comes with mastery. The key insight here is really recognizing, and this is an insight that FutureProof advisors recognize on a daily basis. It's the awareness and then the ability to step out of it, right? They recognize that discomfort isn't a warning sign to retreat. It's a signal that you're strengthening your mental flexibility. It's just like a muscle that feels the burn during exercise. The discomfort of questioning established patterns is actually the true sensation of growing stronger. And that starts in your mind. That's the first principle and pillar of being a future-proof advisor, is that mental fortitude, that mental understanding, that mental awareness. And that's what we have to get over. The second force that makes challenging the status quo so difficult runs even deeper than dopamine. It's our profound aversion to loss. We hate losing. We hate loss. Everybody's heard it, the 2X, we feel losses more intensely, right? Behavioral economists Kahneman and Tversky discovered something profound about human psychology, that we feel losses much more intensely than equivalent gains. And that was profound when it was established, but now it's starting to become talked about so much more that we're like, oh yeah, of course that. But what they also found is that the pain of losing something is psychologically that 2X, as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. This, quote, loss aversion creates this powerful psychological anchor to the status quo. Because even when a change might offer significant benefits, the potential loss of what we already have looms disproportionately large in our minds. In my recent study my national study that I did, which will be launched later this year, as I've been reviewing the research, one of the pieces of research has found that people, even if you double their money, they don't have as much satisfaction, and they're not going to be as appreciative of that as if they lose money. So we could make them as much, but if we lose them any, it hurts. It hurts. It's hard to fill that void, right? And so like in wealth management, this manifests in countless ways, right? In terms of how we run our business, not necessarily how we serve our families or our clients. Maybe you are hesitant to change your CRM system despite the limitations because you worry about losing historical data. Or maybe we maintain inefficient meeting structures because we fear clients are attached to them, even if a new approach would serve them better. We put ourselves in our clients' heads thinking that meeting structure is why they're with us. And it's not. The most insidious aspect of loss aversion is that it operates largely below our conscious awareness. We really don't recognize that we're overvaluing what we have simply because we already have it. Instead, what we do, and I always talk about this, we're master rationalizers, is that we construct rational sounding justifications for maintaining the status quo. This approach has served us well, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it. Our clients expect consistency. We've all said things like this, right? We've all said these statements. These statements may contain elements of truth, but they often mask a deeper psychological resistance to potential loss. Think about the last time you considered a major change to your business model, investment philosophy, or client service approach. I know I felt it. I'm not perfect at this. This is all coming from things that I feel on a daily basis, right? These sensations and that knot and that feeling wasn't your intuition warning you against a bad decision. It was your loss aversion triggering a reflexive protection of what you already have. I've experienced this myself. When we first considered separating our innovation efforts from our core operations, I found myself inventing reasons to keep everything integrated despite the evidence that our innovation was stalling. The thought of losing our integrated approach felt threatening, that I was going to be on an island, that it was going to be so different and nobody was going to be through it. But the gains were going to be so substantial. And now as I've worked through it, that initial feeling of keeping it integrated was incorrect. That the benefit of having it separated has now spurred much more innovation inside of our organization and much more appreciation and adoption of innovation throughout our entire organization. Loss aversion acts like an invisible shock collar. It subtly punishes us whenever we venture too far from the familiar. The anticipation of potential loss creates immediate emotional discomfort, while the benefits of change remain theoretical and distant. The way forward is not to eliminate this aversion. It's hardwired into us. And that's one of the main things that FutureProof advisors understand, is that this isn't trying to get rid of it, but rather to recognize it for what it is. It is a cognitive bias that systematically overweights what you might lose and underweights what you might gain. By naming it, you can begin to counterbalance its effects, consciously giving more weight to potential benefit when evaluating changes. And it doesn't mean you're always going to be right when you make a change. It means that you have the mental ability to understand that whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter, The experience itself is what's going to evolve you and push you forward and allow you to grow. So the third key about challenging the status quo addresses the practical question. How do you actually create space for innovation without disrupting your core business? This is the lesson that I learned directly as we built our transformation division. And the answer really lies in deliberate separation. Innovation requires a fundamentally different environment than day-to-day operations. And innovation should not disrupt day-to-day operations. What is working today needs to continue. That doesn't mean that it needs to be the way in the future, but we need to innovate and build that before we integrate it into the day-to-day operations, right? Day-to-day operations thrive on consistency, efficiency, and predictability. These are virtues in service delivery, in what our business is. But what innovation requires is exploration, experimentation, and occasional failure. Conditions that would be disastrous if applied directly to client experience. The very structures that enable reliable service delivery, hierarchies, approval processes, standardized procedures, those actively inhibit the conditions necessary for breakthrough thinking, right? I learned this lesson the hard way. As our firm grew, we naturally developed more formal processes. These were necessary for consistency as we added team members and served more clients. But those same processes became barriers to change. It's inevitable as you grow. The solution wasn't to abandon structure. That's not what I say. That's not what I'm saying. Because structure is essential for scaling. Instead, we needed to create a separate space within our organization specifically designed for innovation. A transformation division with different norms, different metrics, and different expectations than our core service delivery. I like to think of it like an artist's studio. An artist doesn't paint on your living room wall. They create in a dedicated space where experimentation is expected and messes are part of the process. It's only when the work is ready does it move into your home, right? Similarly, innovation needs its own studio within your organization. A place where questions are more valuable than answers, where experiments are encouraged even when they fail, and where challenging assumptions is the primary objective rather than delivering immediate results. This separation serves several critical functions, right? First, it creates psychological safety for innovation by removing the pressure of immediate client impact. Ideas can be explored based on their potential rather than their perfect execution or immediate ROI. Second, it prevents experimental approaches from disrupting core services. You don't want to test unproven methods directly on clients who expect consistency. And then third, really, it allows different metrics for success. Innovation should have different metrics of success than core services that are being delivered day to day. While your core business might measure efficiency and client satisfaction, your innovation space might track experiments conducted, assumptions tested, or insights generated. And then finally, what this does is it acknowledges that innovation requires a different cadence. Day-to-day operations run on tight schedules and quick decisions. Innovation, though, often needs extended periods of exploration followed by rapid implementation. This deliberate separation isn't just organizational, it's mental, right? It recognizes that challenging the status quo isn't something you can, effectively do while simultaneously executing it. You really need dedicated time, space, and mental bandwidth to step back and question what's become automatic. The fourth insight might be the most counterintuitive, right? True innovation rarely comes from asking clients what they want. We think that we should just go and ask clients what we can do better, right? This whole concept runs against the grain of client-centric thinking, which is foundational to wealth management. Of course, we should listen carefully to clients, understand their needs, and respond to their feedback. But if we limit ourselves to what clients explicitly request, we will miss the most significant opportunities for innovation. We all whether it's in our industry or outside of the services that we consume, we all evaluate potential improvements against what we currently experience, not against what might be possible, because we don't understand how to comprehend what might be possible. I've seen this dynamic play out countless times in our industry. If you ask clients how to improve financial planning, they may suggest incremental enhancements to reports they have already received or more frequent updates on metrics they already track. But they rarely suggest fundamentally different approaches they've never encountered. The most transformative innovations don't just improve existing experiences, they create entirely new ones. And they don't just solve problems clients have articulated, they address the needs clients didn't know they had. Look at some of the most significant advances in our industry. Clients didn't ask for robo-advisors. Entrepreneurs saw an opportunity to serve segments of the market in a new way. Whether it met the expectations or not, it was an innovation in our space. Clients didn't request goal-based planning frameworks. Visionary advisors developed them to change how people think about financial success. Clients didn't demand digital client portals, but forward-thinking firms created them to transform how people engage with their financial lives. So this doesn't mean ignoring client feedback. It's actually quite the opposite. It means developing a deeper understanding of clients' underlying needs, motivations, and constraints that they themselves might articulate. It means observing not just what clients say, but what they do, where they struggle, and what lights them up. And that's the key. It goes deeper. It means that we have to listen, empathize, and connect dots going beyond just what they say on the surface. Because true innovation comes from this deeper understanding, combined with insights from adjacent fields and emerging technologies, all synthesized through the lens of what could be rather than what is. That is the FutureProof Advisor. As I like to say, clients know how to perfect candles, but visionaries introduce the light bulb. If we only listen to what clients explicitly request, we'll be excellent at incrementally improving yesterday's solutions. But to create tomorrow's breakthroughs, we need to go beyond articulated needs to the unarticulated possibilities that could transform their experience. And what this requires is something that all future-proof advisors have. It requires courage. The willingness to develop concepts clients haven't asked for and might initially resist, but this courage is what separates truly innovative firms from those that merely execute well on established models. But here's the thing. At the same time, the world around us is changing at an accelerating pace. Investment options are proliferating. Tax laws are evolving. Client expectations are shifting. Technology is transforming how financial services are delivered. And this creates a tension that's unique to professional services like wealth management. The very consistency that clients value today could become the rigidity that prevents us from serving them effectively tomorrow. I've come to believe that this tension can't be resolved. It can only be managed through a kind of organizational ambidextrity. We must simultaneously deliver the stability clients expect today while developing the capabilities they need tomorrow, even if they don't yet recognize those needs. Think about it this way. If someone told you they could double your firm's impact without adding a single employee, you jump at that opportunity. That's exactly what challenging the status quo offers, the chance to discover approaches that are multiples more effective than what you are doing now. But as with everything great, there is a catch. Those approaches don't yet exist within your current operating model. They require venturing into the discomfort of questioning fundamental assumptions. They demand creating space for exploration, separate from execution. The firms that thrive in the coming decades, the future-proof advisors, won't be the ones with the most assets or the most advisors. They'll be the ones that cultivate this ambidextrity, maintaining rock-solid consistency in their core operations while simultaneously building the capability to reimagine those operations as the world changes. Change is not the enemy of stability. It's what enables enduring stability in a changing world. Comfort feels good in the moment, but it's progressive adaptation that ensures lasting success. So, I'll leave you with a question that shaped my own approach to building a future-proof firm. Isn't it our duty to challenge the status quo precisely so we can continue providing our clients the stability they seek, not just today, but for years to come? If you enjoyed today's episode, forward it to a friend. That would mean the world. Or like the episode, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe to our channel to be alerted on all of our new episodes each week. And before you leave, be sure to answer our one question poll, which is linked in the summary to today's pod. It's a simple question. What's your honest reaction when you first think about challenging a routine aspect of your business? With that, I say thank you. Thank you for spending some time with me today. It means the world to me, and I'll never take it for granted. So go out there and be part of the change that betters our industry. Stay well, be well, and keep on exploring.